They asked her to stay on just a month to help with the backlog. One more lap around a track her feet knew better than her own living room. So, on a grey Tuesday in late February, Evelyn May Porter, 71, climbed the back stairs of St. Brigid Community Hospital with a thermos of weak coffee and a sweater that never quite beat the draft that lived in medical records. The hospital had changed its name twice, painted over its history 3 times, and added a helipad, a MRI suite, and a social media manager. Still, the records room smelled like paper and antiseptic and a little like rain. Some institutions never lost their weather. They were digitizing the last of the 80s, 1984 to 1986, the years when shoulder pads were high and barcode bands were still a bright idea that hadn't made it to their floor. Back then, Evelyn could have run postpartum in her sleep. Clip, check, chart, nurse the baby, check mum's fundus, perform the tug test on those flimsy plastic ID bands, double-sign the footprint card, and make sure the pink bassinet card matched what was on the crib and what was on the mother's wrist. She remembered her own handwriting slanting across charts like a reliable fence, neat, readable, accountable. If you wanted to know what happened at 4:12 on June 5, 1985, you could find the exact oxygen saturation and who had held the suction. The body forgets. Ink doesn't. Evelyn sat with a banker's box on her lap and the rolling cart pulled close. OB Archives, 1985, May Sept. Someone had written on a cracked label. Inside, manila folders with the hospital's anthropology, birth plans typed on IBM Selectrics, consent forms cloudy with carbons, lab slips with coffee rings, and the small, solemn footprint cards stamped in ink that outlived sleep and marriages. She flipped past what her eye recognized: dehydration protocols, VBAC trial notes, a clothespin clipped to a case where a father fainted and hit the warmer with his shoulder. Then she saw the first odd thing. Not a red flag exactly, but a thread that asked to be tugged. Perez, Elena, female, 6LB2 Oz, A, Apgar 89. The footprint card was clipped to Mom's chart, as it should be. Initials EMP in the corner, hers. But the blood type on the newborn summary read O+. Back in 85, blood typing newborns wasn't universal the way it later became. Unless there was a concern. Rh incompatibility, jaundice, a transfusion workup. In this case, there had been a concern. Elena Perez was clearly marked A and had received RhoGAM at 28 weeks and again postpartum. Evelyn's brow folded into the shape her colleagues recognized as the wrinkle that finds things. In 85, they would never chart an infant as O+ to an A mom without at least a note that RhoGAM would be ineffective against a rising titer if the infant were Rh positive and mom had already sensitized. But the antibody screen for the mother was negative. Good. The baby's cord blood? The lab slip was there, stamped late night, a text initial she could practically hear muttered SR. It read infant ABO ORH-POS. Hematocrit and Coombs were normal. So far, so medically ordinary. But the footprint card, that small rectangle of identity, said A. Someone had written over it later, a hasty O+ squeezed between the toes, as if correcting grocery math. And on the back, the mother's label had a faint eraser halo, like a name had been removed and retyped. She took a breath. Memory, like paper, has layers. Evelyn flipped to the adjacent chart. Perry, Elaine, male, 7LB0 Oz, O+, Apgar 99. Perez, Perry, Eleanor, Elaine. The kind of similarity that makes a nurse insist on reading aloud. The kind of similarity that makes a unit devise a ritual. Say the name, spell the name, match the band, match the crib card, match the mum. 1,000 rituals were born from a single night someone almost didn't. The Perry chart showed Elaine as O+, the infant as A, again with a lab slip initialed SR. The footprints were crisp, newborn arches blooming like ivy on stone. The bassinet card showed Perry Boy clipped behind a clear shield, but on the postpartum rounding note, Evelyn's own pen had written, "Mother nursed well, latch assessed, infant bands checked versus chart, all correct." And yet the ABO data were reversed. In both charts, she felt the first cold finger run down her back. Infants do not often get their blood type wrong. Typing errors in the lab occur, yes, but two charts, opposite mothers, mirror mistakes? Unlikely. She closed both folders and pressed her palm on top of them, the way you might hold a skittish animal. Through the paper, she could feel the impressions of her younger self, the pressure she used then, the speed she trusted, the pride she took in getting the bands right, the room right, the mother heard. A sound travelled the stacks, the building settling, or a memory finding its coat. Evelyn stood, carried the two charts to the light, and lined up the footprint cards beneath them. The Perez card had the daughter's prints angled slightly leftward. The Perry card was straight. She closed her eyes and reached back to the delivery rooms of June 1985. The heat, the music from the radio, a resident insisted made the babies cry with better color. The new attending who had wanted everything by the book, and a senior nurse, herself, whose book had notes in the margins. The admission logs, she found them 2 boxes down. Delivery log, 1985, June-July, June 12th, 0307, Perez, Elena, female. June 12th, 0313, Perry, Elaine, male. 2 deliveries, 6 minutes apart, 2 rooms, same team toggling like a ballet. She could see it. A baby boy with a lusty cry, a baby girl a shade slow to pink. 2 families, one Spanish-speaking abuela whispering blessings, one husband pacing and counting and recounting. 2 bassinets rolling to nursery door at once. 2 mothers, Elena on magnesium for borderline blood pressure, Elaine exhausted but euphoric. 2 sets of bands clicked, 2 cards clipped, 2 sets of chalky footprints pressed onto those keepsake cards that end up in frames, or in the back of drawers or in boxes like this one. The old nursery had a system, a crib strip with the mother's last name and a 4-digit number, a band on baby's ankle and wrist, and on mother's wrist, all with identical numbers. It was a system built to survive noise, human, mechanical, emotional. But every system is only as strong as the moment when it meets fatigue. Evelyn remembered the night shift that followed. 2 nurses out sick, one float from oncology, who had never seen the way a day-old can Houdini its band free. The lab tech coming up to draw cord blood because the runner was tied up in ER with a trauma. She pulled one more document, the nursery log for that hour. Bands checked, yes. Mother-infant ID verified, yes. No visitors in nursery. SR drew cord blood X2. Footprints done 0401, SR. She could picture Sam Rizzo, moustache made for a different decade, good at crosswords and calm with bleeding. He'd since retired to Arizona. She sent him a card once when his wife passed. He had been meticulous. If the cord blood labels got mixed, it wasn't Sam. If the footprints got swapped, it wasn't Sam either. That was a nursery task, which meant the error, if there was one, lived in the space between 2 bassinets and a counter of cards. Not a grand conspiracy. A minute's confusion that could echo for a lifetime. Evelyn knew what she owed and to whom. She owed it to both women, to Elena Perez and Elaine Perry, to ask without assuming, to escalate without inflaming, to let process carry the weight so that people didn't collapse under it. She took the charts to risk management. "We are digitizing historic records," she said to Hannah, the risk officer with the posture of someone who sits a lot and the eyes of someone who sees further than her desk. In 2 charts, blood types appear reversed between the mothers and infants, delivered within minutes of each other. The footprint cards show signs of erasure and alteration. If an identity swap occurred, it happened 40 years ago. There is no barcode trail, only manual logs and sign-offs. I'm not bringing this for drama. I'm bringing it because it is real. Hannah didn't reach for a form or a phrase book of apologies. She listened. She asked for copies, chain of custody handling for the originals, because evidence matters even when the statute of immediate mistakes has long expired, and she called legal. Evelyn watched the process draw itself like a careful stitch. Legal said words like duty to warn, hyper, historic incident, likelihood versus harm. Everyone in that small room felt the electricity of the unwelcome, but necessary. In the quiet after phone calls, Hannah asked, "Do you remember either family?" Evelyn hesitated. Memory lies when we ask it to prove itself. It tells us we predicted what we only endured. I remember a grandmother's scarf, bright red with sunflowers. I remember a husband saying, "I can't believe it's a boy," and crying as if someone had opened a spigot. I remember charting Perez, breastfeeding, good latch at 03:55, and Perry, first voids 04:12. I remember music. And I remember the fear you get when the floor is wet but you have to run. Hannah nodded. We can't time travel. What we can do is decide whether we will live with a question we could answer. She looked down at the footprint cards and then back at Evelyn. If this is a real swap, those children are 40 now. They have medical histories that might include family traits that aren't theirs, risks they didn't track because they didn't know. The harm of not knowing could be greater than the harm of learning late. The plan unfolded. Pull a wider sample from that night, every chart from June 10-13, audit for other inconsistencies, locate the two families if possible through last known addresses and vital records. Seek ethics committee guidance, approach with trauma-aware language, and offer confirmatory DNA via an independent lab at the hospital's expense. The hospital would not argue with truth or pretend that time absolved error. It would stand as an institution that can say a sentence many cannot. We may have made a mistake. We want to help you know. Evelyn went home that night with the kind of tired that sits in your bones and stares at the ceiling even when your eyes close. She thought of the Perez girl, the Perry boy, middle-aged now, with knees that click, perhaps, and mortgages, and anniversaries they haven't kept up with, and mothers who started as girls in the rooms down the hall from where the records lay. She thought of the strange democracy of hospital rooms, how it levels us, how it lifts us, how it records us in ink that won't ask if the truth is convenient. On Thursday, the wider audit found no other mismatches, just the two, which was its own kind of certainty. A narrow mistake is more plausible than a global failure. Legal and ethics conferred. Risk crafted a script that wasn't a script, bullet points of respect. Acknowledge, inform, support, do not rush, do not speculate, offer resources. They located Elena Perez, now Elena Morales, a school cafeteria manager in Easton, and Elaine Perry, now Elaine Whitcomb, who ran a nail salon in Ashbrook, both still within an hour of St. Bridget's, lives orbiting the hospital the way moths circle a porch light, never far, never truly touching, each carrying her own weather. Who should tell them? Hannah asked. Evelyn knew the answer before her breath caught up. I charted those nights. My initials are on those cards. If I still have any use left to this place, let it be to sit in a living room and say the sentence slowly enough that it lands. Hannah looked at her for a long moment. You shouldn't carry this alone. I won't, Evelyn said, but I will start it. She ironed her skirt the way her mother taught her. She put her badge in her purse, though she no longer needed it to open doors. She rehearsed the first line in her mind. My name is Evelyn Porter. I was a nurse at St. Bridget in 1985. I'm here because the hospital believes a mistake may have been made when your child was born. She prayed without asking for outcomes, only for clarity. Then she and Hannah drove to Easton. The Perez Morales apartment smelled of cumin and laundry and the human reality of a Tuesday. Elena sat with her hands folded the way people do when the past arrives at their coffee table and asks for a seat. At first she didn't understand what a mix-up could possibly mean. Then she did, all at once, and her body knew before her words did. Her eyes went to the wall where framed photos lived from preschool to a wedding under a pergola. Lupita, her daughter, dark hair, quick smile, a dimple on the left, a beauty mark like a quotation mark near her chin. "My daughter," she whispered, as if the word might run away if she said it too loud. "Mihia, she is your daughter," Evelyn said, and meant it in every way a nurse understands. Biology isn't the only truth that binds. And we need to learn whether the hospital placed the wrong bracelet on a baby in 1985. If so, then there is another woman who has loved a boy with your blood in his veins, and you have loved a girl with hers. No truth we find will change the love that has already done its work, but it could change what you know and how you guard your health. They left with permission to contact Lupita, and with a small, folded grief wrapped in Eleanor's thanks. The next stop would be Elaine Whitcomb's tidy ranch house with a bee flag and a garden that forgave the drought. Evelyn felt the old hospital elevator in her bones again. The ascent, the doors that would open on whatever waited, the instinct to square your shoulders and check your pockets for a pen. 40 years earlier, she had looked down at 2 bassinets and said, "All correct." Now she would look 2 mothers in the face and say, "We have to check again." That is the work, she thought, and the ink that doesn't fade isn't on paper alone. It lives in us, and it asks to be read. Elaine Whitcomb opened the door with a smile that belonged to someone raised to offer tea before asking questions. She wore a cardigan, the color of clouds about to be forgiven, and a manicure that said, "Steady hand." Behind her, the living room was a museum of a boy's becoming, a varsity photo, a papier-mâché volcano, a graduation cap draped over the corner of a frame. "Come in," she said, and when Hannah showed her badge and Evelyn said her name, the smile became composure's cousin. "Is my son all right?" was her first question, the reflex of a mother whose body has memorized triage. "He is," Evelyn said. "We're not here about an accident. We're here about 1985. And they sat at a table with placemats that matched nothing except each other. Evelyn began the way she had practiced. "Our review of delivery records from June 12, 1985, has raised the possibility that 2 infants' identity bands were switched shortly after birth. Your records and another mother's show blood type entries that appear to be reversed. We would like to sponsor confidential DNA testing for you and your son, and for the other family, to determine whether there was a switch. We will support you regardless of the result. What we cannot do is pretend we didn't find what we found." It wasn't one moment of reaction. It was a tapestry of them. Elaine put her hand to her mouth, then laid it flat on the table, as if steadying a boat. "Switched," she said, tasting the word like a spice she'd only read about. "You're telling me my boy—" She looked over at the mantel where Tyler smiled at a fish he was too gentle to kill. She pressed the heel of her hand to her chest. "He's mine," she said, not asking, not arguing, but laying a cornerstone. "He is." "Yes," Evelyn said, "in every way that word deserves. Biology's a truth. So is raising." Hannah slid a folder across the table. A letter on hospital letterhead acknowledging the concern, a list of resources, counselors, legal aid if needed, medical geneticists, and a simple outline of the DNA saliva collection process with an independent lab. "You can say no," she said. "We will honor that. You can say not now. You can say yes and then stop later. We will not surprise you. We will move at your speed." Elaine nodded in that slow, heavy way the body uses when it needs to ferry a thought across a river. "He should be here," she murmured, and reached for her phone. "He's on shift till 2. He's a wildlife officer. He'll come." She texted the way mothers do when they cloak instructions in love. Then she stood, poured tea she did not drink, and sat again. "Do you remember the day?" she asked Evelyn. "I do, in pieces. It was hot. The radio played Whitney Houston so loudly the nurse laughed and said the baby would come out singing. The woman next door spoke Spanish and her mother had a scarf. Bright. "Sunflowers," Evelyn said, before she could stop herself. Elaine blinked, surprised the way people are when someone else remembers a detail they thought only they kept. "I checked bands," Evelyn added quietly. the confession of a woman of integrity. I checked and charted all correct. If they were not, then I missed what I should have seen. Elaine reached across the table and did the strange thing that sometimes happens when a hard sentence lands in a room with decent people. She touched Evelyn's wrist. "We were all tired," she said. "I wasn't a mother yet, and I already knew tired would be my religion. I don't know what happened. I do know that if the truth is somewhere, I want to look at it." Tyler came straight from the truck, boots dusty, kindness leading his face. He hugged his mother, then stood with his hat in his hands like a man in church. He listened to the whole explanation without interrupting, then asked practical questions. "If the test says I'm not biologically hers, what changes?" "Nothing changes your childhood. Nothing changes your legal parentage. Nothing changes who raised whom," Hannah said. "What might change is medical history, for you and for another person, and the possibility of knowing a family you didn't know you had." He looked from Hannah to Evelyn. "And the other family?" "A woman named Elena," Evelyn said. "Her daughter is named Guadalupe, goes by Lupita. They have agreed to test." "Then let's do it," he said, the way a man decides to lift something heavy because it needs lifting. The kits arrived by courier 2 days later. The instructions were intolerably cheerful for what they asked. Spit in a tube while reorganizing your sense of self. Both families completed them, sealed them, and watched the courier drive away as if their pasts were visible in the passenger seat. Then they waited. Waiting is the old talent no one asks to master. Elaine filled the time the way she always had, feeding others. She brought cookies to the neighbor with a bad hip. She made soup for the woman who ran the craft store. She babysat for a nurse who worked nights at the same hospital that had become a metronome to her memory. Elena waited differently. She cleaned, not because her apartment needed it, but because the sight of a cleared countertop was a sentence she could finish. Evelyn waited in the quiet defiance of a woman who refused to compose her apology before the truth arrived. Hannah tracked the lab's chain of custody like a drumbeat. On a Wednesday with rain that couldn't decide if it meant it, the email came. Hannah drove to Easton first, then to Ashbrook, with envelopes she did not open until she was inside each living room. Evelyn sat beside her the first time. The second time, she sat across. She wanted to see faces uncomplicated by being looked at too closely. "The results show," Hannah began, and the quiet in the room sharpened, "that Tyler is biologically related to Elena Perez and not to Elaine Whitcomb, and that Guadalupe is biologically related to Elaine Whitcomb and not to Elena Morales." It was not a gasp moment. It was the slow fall of bricks coloring a garden wall. Elaine closed her eyes as if a wind had finally found her, and she was ready to lean into it. Elena put both hands on her cheeks, like the girls in old paintings do when they're told their whole life is a myth and a truth at once. Tyler drew a breath and met his mother's eyes. "You're still my mom," he said, before anyone could say something cruel to themselves. "That's not up for debate." Calls were made, carefully, with Evelyn sometimes holding the phone as if the line itself needed anchoring. They arranged what they called coffee meetings, first mother to mother, then all four, then broader if anyone wanted. The hospital offered a neutral conference room. Both families chose kitchens instead. Kitchens are where Americans tell the truth. Elaine and Elena met first at Elena's apartment because Elena said, "Mi casa es pequeña, but it has room for this." They studied each other like sisters, separated by a storm, familiar in ways they couldn't name. The red scarf with sunflowers lay on the chair back, an offering to memory. They spoke like people who'd prepared apologies and found instead recognition. "I hope you never doubted your motherhood," Elaine said, and Elena laughed a sound that had lived in her throat 40 years. "Every day," she admitted, then shook her head. "And not once." They cried a little. They did not try to fix the cosmos. They set a date for the next coffee and texted their children, "We are okay. We are odd and okay." The four met a week later at Evelyn's suggestion in a place that sold cinnamon rolls as big as a face. Tyler arrived with flowers that somehow did not look ridiculous in his hands. Lupita brought a photo album. They sat, awkward, for 7 minutes, and then for 3 hours they were not. Lupita had Elaine's eyes. Tyler had Elena's dimple. Both had what their mothers had given them in the currency beyond blood: manners, humor, a way of sitting that told the world they had been loved. There were no dramatic declarations, no "I always knew," no "everything makes sense now." There were small stories: Tyler's nut allergy and Elena's brother's, Lupita's flat feet and Elaine's father's, medical notes penciled into a shared spreadsheet, not because they were impatient to be a family, but because they were careful. They did not force closeness. They built it the way people build porches, one board at a time, with a level and a laugh and a break for lemonade. The hospital, for its part, did not run from the story or spin it into a brochure. It offered what was owed: apology letters signed by the CEO, counseling, genetic counseling, waived fees for any immediate medical follow-up, and a public statement that did not perform sorrow so much as own responsibility. Policies were audited for the sake of the living, not to decorate a press release. ID barcodes had long replaced the old bands. Readback protocols were re-emphasized. Two-person match verification in the delivery room and at every transfer was retrained. Nursery signage was updated in plain English and Spanish. Evelyn stood at the staff meeting, grey sweater and all, and told a room of nurses, "We are the last eyes on the small truths that make big truths sturdy. Check the band. Say the name. Spell it. If your feet hurt, sit for a minute, but not while the bands are in your hands." The younger nurses listened, not because the policy said so, but because her voice carried the weight of a lifetime of midnights. What of guilt? Evelyn asked herself, late at night when the room was quiet enough to hear her heart do what hearts do. She tried it on like a coat that didn't fit. She had charted all correct. Perhaps the bands had matched in that moment. The crib cards correct, the bracelets numbers aligned, and the swap occurred minutes later at the footprint counter. 2 bassinets side by side, a tech in the room, a volunteer knocking to ask where to put the folded blankets. The point wasn't to script a forgiveness. The point was to live a truth. I will not look away, because the looking hurts. She wrote a letter to Elena and Elaine in the voice she would have hoped to receive. If my hands set down a card that did not belong, I am sorry. If my eyes missed what they should have caught, I am sorry. If my care across years has meant anything, let it be this: that I brought the question to your table and stayed to hear your answer. The families took the long route to something like peace. Elaine attended Lupita's son's t-ball game and cried when a small boy in a too-big cap hit a ball that rolled with tenacity rather than speed. Elena sent Tyler a recipe for sopa de fideo and a note: "For when you are tired, but you want comfort." Tyler visited Elena's apartment and fixed a leaky faucet without being asked. He didn't do it to audition for a role. He did it because you fix a thing you can fix. Lupita drove out with Elaine to the lake where Tyler worked patrol and learned that the birds everyone calls seagulls are really ring-billed gulls, laughed at herself, and stored the fact away as if it were a family story. Not every conversation was easy. There were boundaries to negotiate: holidays, Mother's Days, words like mom and mummy and when to use which. They erred and apologized. They overthought and then let it be. They found a grammar that worked. My mom, my mother, my other mother, said sometimes with humor so that tenderness could survive. People asked them inappropriate questions. That's a thing people do when a story carries spectacle in its pocket. "Do you feel cheated?" someone asked Elaine at the salon. "I feel full," Elaine said, surprising herself. "I have my son and a daughter I didn't know to miss. That's not a cheat. That's a strange kind of grace." Elena got asked if she would switch them back if she could time travel. "Life is not a game of cups," she said. "You don't pick up and put down children like marbles. We have what we have now, more people to love, and a hospital that told the truth when it could have kept quiet. On the anniversary, June 12th, they lit 2 candles on a cake and laughed at the absurd symmetry of celebrating a mix-up with frosting. They invited Evelyn and Hannah. Evelyn brought the footprint cards, not the originals. Those stayed in a climate-controlled file like the relics they were, but high-quality scans framed side by side, labeled with both families' names and the date, not as a trophy of error, but as a map of arrival. "These belonged in a box in a basement," she said, setting them on the mantel. "Now they belong in a story you tell in your own words." That night, Evelyn went home and sat with her thermos of weak coffee and a sweater that still didn't beat the draft. She thought about the hospital floors that had carried her steps and the years she had pushed the same carts down the same hallways with new babies, new mothers, old worries, old joys. A mix-up had hidden for 4 decades, not because evil is clever, but because humans are tired and systems are imperfect. It had been found not because machines got smarter, but because a nurse with a long memory read ink the way some read stars. If there is a moral, it is not that everything can be fixed. It is that telling the truth late is better than leaving it buried. That love built over time survives information. That institutions can be brave in small, administrative ways that matter. A phone call, a letter, a meeting at a kitchen table. And that a woman who had checked bans her whole life could end her career with a different kind of check, one that honored the human beings those bans were meant to serve. On the last day of her extra month, the just a month that had extended because life does that, Evelyn turned in her badge. She walked through the nursery one more time because the present deserves to be looked at even when the past makes a good story. The bands now had barcodes. The bassinets had RFID tags. The monitors sang quiet lullabies of numbers. A new nurse, hair up, cheeks flushed with purpose, matched bands to wrists, said the names aloud, spelled them, smiled at a mother who had been a girl 10 minutes ago and was now something larger than the world. "All correct," the young nurse said. And Evelyn believed her, not because the words were familiar, but because they were backed by systems and by a culture that had learned the humility of checking twice. Evelyn stepped into the hallway, leaned a hand against the cool tile and whispered, not to anyone, not even to God exactly, but to the ink that had recorded, and the hearts that had carried, and the truth that had crossed a kitchen table to be spoken. "All correct now."